I think that's an excellent analysis of how the establishment would view the two different candidates and why they would then decide that they could pull behind Bush and go with what you call the A team again. It still doesn't completely explain why the B team, that is Dukakis and the Democrats, didn't fight harder for the presidency, didn't go after Bush more aggressively on this Noriega drugs, Contra drugs, the Iran arms deals, the whole relationships of Bush and Reagan to the Ayatollahs. Why didn't Dukakis and the Democrats use these issues to probably win the election if they could have publicized them? It was the negative campaign of Bush against Dukakis that many people think helped win it for Bush. Couldn't Dukakis have done an honest negative campaign against Bush, telling the actual truth about Bush? And why didn't he? I still have trouble.
Of course. The fact that the Reagan administration is the most corrupt in the history of the country. They've had, what, almost 200 people either indicted or in jail for corruption in this administration.
And the Democrats didn't go after this corruption issue. Why?
Well, this again gets back to the decision they made. I mean, we can only cite what they did, and then it speaks for itself. Dan Inouye, running this committee, a Democrat, made it a joint thing, and then the Democrats shut up and let the Republicans use it as a forum to advance the national security state, the CIA's activities, the Contra program, instead of exposing the corruption. That's where the decision was made. Dukakis is just another member of the team. Whatever economic miracle supposedly occurred in Massachusetts under his governorship was done in great part with defense expenditures. He is bought into the system. He's a member of the team. With the establishment, as we know, as we've observed, I remember talking to Les Kurtz about this when he was developing the draft of his book, The Nuclear Cage, and we were talking about the military-industrial, the Iron Triangle, the military-industrial complex, the defense corporations, the Pentagon, and the Congress. And then we took it a step further. Of course, it includes the media. As everyone well knows, the point of alternative views is that the media is owned, literally, by the same people who own the defense corporations. But then we took it a step further. It's not even a quadrangle. It's a pentad, or a pentagon, because you also have the universities, the educational system, in which the defense corporations and the Pentagon are careful to invest heavily. 70% of some of these big universities' budgets come from defense, money. So the professors are paid for, the salaries are paid for by the defense complex, and so they're bought into the system. So you have that power structure and control, and that power structure determined not to let the system be destroyed or be weakened, even at the price of their own. Let me put it this way. Jimmy Carter, for example, he demonstrated this what I would call misdirected loyalty. After the 1980 thing, he did not go public and protest the Iran-Contra deal. He did not protest it in October when he had these reports coming in, because he didn't want to destroy the system of which he was part. To go back to another era, in 1960, Richard Nixon lost to John Kennedy in a very close election, which turned in part on Mayor Daley in Chicago, counting every grave in Chicago twice. Now, this scandal was known at the time. Nixon didn't mention it until, God knows, 20 years later. He eventually said he couldn't make an issue without destroying the credibility of the presidential election process, and he wanted to have another shot at the presidency.
Which he got.
Which he got and became president. If he had destroyed or attacked the system, if he had exposed that scandal, it would have destroyed, perhaps. It wouldn't take all that much to lead the American people to have a big mental breakthrough and demand a change in the system, perhaps in the direction of a parliamentary system where we could, at the time of an Iran-Contra scandal, there would be forced a vote of confidence, and Reagan certainly would have been out. In December of 86, he would have been out, without question.
This is my studies on the power structure in the mass media. This is the main thing they try to keep from the American public, how the economic and political system really works. because the Americans wouldn't like that at all if they really knew.
Saw how scared the establishment dodged a bullet, how scared they got in the Jackson run at the presidency this last time, because Jackson is the first national prominent figure since I can remember who has achieved prominence and represents the interests of the people pretty directly. And the manipulations they had to go through to keep him from getting a position of in fact, power. Just to cite one example of how far they will go, this loose association of X's from the national security, we were flying to Iowa to do a hearing to try to force the candidates to tell us their policies. At that point, there were a lot of candidates. And on the plane, the day we went up there, the New York Times had a big piece on where the polls put all the candidates at that time in Iowa. And it had Simon, I think, was leading in a big front page article, and then a long discussion, Simon and Dukakis and the others and whatnot. And then you went to page 3 for the bigger article, the details, and it turns out Jesse Jackson was running a very close second. It was sort of like 33 to 31, but his name was not mentioned on the front page of the New York Times.
Well, the Times...
And inside they showed the polls, but on the front page they didn't want him to have the name recognition.
Well, the Times and all the mainstream media pretty much did a blackout on the, excuse the metaphor, on the Jackson campaign until the Super Tuesday primaries where he won, and then he became ahead actually after the Michigan primaries. He was the front runner, and then they had to give some attention to Jackson, and they tried to make it negative, and then Dukakis regained the momentum in the Pennsylvania, New York primaries. So that was probably the only hope, looking back.
The party machinery shifted gears at that time, scared, because Jackson was leading, and there was a chance that the people would really get excited about this thing, and that 50% control asserted itself. The party machinery asserted itself, and Jackson was pushed down and Dukakis was run in instead. They did it by calling Jackson a radical. They said it's not racial, we have no problem with his skin color, although there would be some people in the South who wouldn't vote for him, but he's a radical, meaning he doesn't support the establishment. And they got that word out to the party, to the party hacks throughout the nation. And the result is that Jackson's, I've been wishing and hoping, like what you said, that Jackson would split off and give us a third party. And with the people that I believe would follow him, we might be able to force onto the two-party system a viable third party. And then we could, throw our block of votes to the right or the left, depending on who would give us the most real concessions. I don't think Jackson will ever get these concessions from the Democratic Party, which is where he's trying to.
I noticed the election night, I flipped on one channel, I think it was NBC, and the analyst was saying, well, the reason Dukakis lost was because Jackson spoke out for him. And then I immediately turned to the next channel, which was ABC, and that pundit was saying, well, the reason he lost was because Jackson refused to support him.
Which was total nonsense, because Jackson was traveling all over the country, literally every day, campaigning, 10 things a day he was doing, or, many.
And then this was followed up, I saw it, a big Newsweek article analyzing the election, and it said, well, they were looking at the prospects for the future, and they said the only thing the Democrats can do is to go with people like Gary Robb, who are conservatives, so that the Democrats can move to the right. They said the worst thing they could do would be go Jesse Jackson, because it would tear apart the Democratic Party and destroy it.
Who have lost every election with these centrist liberals like Mondale and Dukakis.
But you were talking about the Democrats. Isn't there another problem which the Democrats had, and that is they went lockstep right along with Reagan and Reaganomics and providing money for the Contras. The whole bit. Arms buildup.
Absolutely. See, the arms buildup, for example, the money, the power structure that keeps the Democrats in office, the ones that are in office, Reaganomics paid off enormously for them. Now, you do get into a lot of individual struggles and infighting, and the system, it isn't monolithic, it isn't the controllers of the country being in lockstep. Not at all. Some of them actually jump out of the windows of their office buildings in New York committing suicide on occasion. There's a lot of tugging and pulling, but nevertheless, when the chips are down, the establishment will not go for the jugular vein, their own jugular vein, if you will. They will cooperate in a cover-up. Howard Baker, going in to straighten out the Reagan White House, thereby perhaps forever abandoning his shot at the presidency. Nixon, refusing to expose the scandal. Jimmy Carter refusing to expose the scandal.
And Dukakis is the same thing.
Dukakis refusing to expose the scandal. Lyndon Johnson's behavior after they'd killed John Kennedy. The Warren Commission, a cover-up. Let's get back to business as usual. Let's calm the nation down. Let's not take the scab off the wound, and let the people see. Let's paper it over and cover it up and put a bandage on it and get on with business as usual.
Well,
because of what's at stake is the viability of the system for them. So to draw a conclusion, to wrap up our discussion today, it would seem that we really can't expect from the Democrats or the media any real exposures of the scandals and corruption of the system, any real important efforts to change or reform or transform the system. That really depends on the people, that we're the only active agents of change, that it depends on alternative media, alternative socially critical progressive researchers to dig this dirt up. That this is sort of our obligation, that if change is going to happen, it's not going to come from the Democratic Party, it's not going to come from the media, it can only come from the people, so that our obligation during the Bush years is to be critical, vigilant, and militant in trying to smoke out all of these scandals and get rid of Bush and force the system to change. That that's the only way change comes about.